Emily signed off her charts, slid her badge into her bag, and took a deep breath. "I'm done," she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. She waved goodbye to the charge nurse and started walking toward the elevator when something made her stop. Room 312. She didn't know why her eyes went there. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was that quiet inner voice nurses learn to trust. Room 312 belonged to an elderly man named Robert Hayes, admitted earlier that afternoon with chest discomfort and shortness of breath. Tests had come back mostly stable. The doctors planned to run more in the morning. He was supposed to be low risk. Emily hesitated. Not my patient anymore, she told herself. But still she turned around. Inside room 312 the lights were dim. Robert Hayes lay quietly on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He was 67 years old, a retired high school history teacher, widowed with a kind face and tired eyes. Emily had cared for him earlier, helped him adjust his pillow, listened as he talked about his late wife, Linda, and how hospitals made him nervous because she'd passed away in one. "Mr. Hayes," Emily said softly. He turned his head. "Oh, hi nurse. I thought you were off." "I am," she smiled. "I just wanted to check on you before I go." "That's kind of you," he said. "I didn't want to bother anyone, but I feel a little strange." Emily's heart skipped. "Strange how?" she asked, stepping closer. He hesitated. "A pressure. Not pain exactly. Just uncomfortable." Emily didn't rush. She didn't panic. She pulled the chair closer and sat down, even though her shift was technically over. She checked his vitals again. Blood pressure slightly elevated. Heart rate a little irregular. To anyone else it might have seemed minor. To Emily it felt wrong. She remembered her first year as a nurse, when a senior nurse had told her, "Machines don't save lives. Nurses who pay attention do." Emily pressed the call button. The night nurse arrived. "What's up?" "I don't like this," Emily said calmly. "Can we get an EKG? Now." The night nurse glanced at the chart. He was stable. "I know," Emily replied. "But please, just trust me." Minutes later, the EKG told a different story. Subtle changes. Dangerous changes. A silent warning. A doctor was paged immediately. Within moments the room filled with movement and urgency. Robert's condition worsened rapidly. His breathing became labored. His face turned pale. "Am I dying?" he whispered, fear shaking his voice. Emily grabbed his hand. "Not tonight," she said firmly. "I'm right here." He looked at her, eyes filled with fear and trust. The diagnosis came fast. An impending major cardiac event. If Emily hadn't stayed, if she hadn't listened, if she hadn't trusted her instincts, Robert would have gone into full cardiac arrest alone in his room. They rushed him to the cath lab. Emily stood back as the doors closed, her heart pounding. Her shift had ended nearly an hour ago, yet she was still there. Still wearing the same scrubs, still holding the weight of someone else's life in her hands. She finally left the hospital close to 10 p.m. that night, exhausted beyond words. She didn't know what happened to Robert. She didn't expect praise. She didn't tell anyone. To her it was just being human. 2 days later, Emily was back on shift when the unit clerk called out her name. "Emily, you have a visitor." She frowned. Visitors weren't common for nurses. In the hallway stood Robert Hayes, alive, smiling, and standing beside a tall woman in her 30s with tear-filled eyes. "There she is," Robert said. Emily froze. "This is my daughter, Sarah," he said. "And I'm only here because of you." Sarah stepped forward and hugged Emily before she could react. "They told me," Sarah said through tears. "They told me if you hadn't stayed, I would have lost my dad." Emily felt her throat tighten. "I just did my job," she said quietly. Robert shook his head. "No, you did more. You stayed." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I used to tell my students that history isn't made by famous people alone. It's made by ordinary people who choose to care. You reminded me of that." After they left, Emily went into the supply room and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that sometimes the smallest decisions carry the greatest weight. Years later, Emily would still think about that night. Not because she saved a life, but because she almost didn't stay. And that's the lesson. In a world that's always rushing, always telling us to clock out, move on and think about ourselves first, kindness asks us to pause, to listen, to care just a little longer. You may never work in a hospital. You may never save a life in such a dramatic way. But every day you're given the same choice Emily was given.